There's a specific kind of silence that follows a phone call like that. Not the silence of a quiet room or a peaceful evening, but the kind that presses down on your chest like something heavy left behind after the words have gone. I sat in my recliner for a long time after I hung up, phone still warm in my hand, staring at the amber pill bottles lined up on my side table like little soldiers standing guard over a body that was running out of fight. I had called my son, Marcus, to ask for help. That's not something I do easily. I spent 34 years working road construction in the Carolinas, pouring asphalt in summer heat that could buckle your knees. And I never once asked anyone to carry my weight. I raised Marcus mostly alone after his mother passed when he was 11. I packed his lunches, helped with geometry homework. I barely understood myself. Drove him to baseball practice and sat in the bleachers in the rain. I gave him everything I could give from a body that had already started wearing down by the time he hit high school. So when I called him at 63 years old, 2 weeks out of back surgery that had cost me more than I'd planned, and asked him if he could cover my prescription refill, I already felt ashamed doing it. The medication wasn't optional. It was anti-inflammatory and nerve pain management that my surgeon had said was non-negotiable during recovery. Without it, I'd set back the healing and risk complications. The bill came to $194. I'd rounded up to $200 when I mentioned it to Marcus, so he wouldn't feel like I was nickel and diming him. He sighed, long and deliberate, like a man carrying an enormous burden. Dad, things are really tight right now. Denise and I have a lot going on. I'm sorry. I really am. But I can't do it right now. I told him not to worry about it. I told him I'd figure something out. I told him I loved him and I'd talk to him soon. Then I sat in my chair, looked at those pill bottles, and did the math. If I cut each dose in half, I could stretch the remaining supply long enough to get to my next Social Security deposit. It would mean more pain and slower healing. But I'd manage. I'd managed worse. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. Not my neighbor Clyde. Not my younger sister Paulette, who lived 40 minutes away in Gastonia. I just quietly started splitting pills on the edge of my kitchen counter every morning and told myself it was fine. What I did not know, what I had absolutely no way of knowing, was that 3 days after that phone call, my son Marcus drove 45 minutes across 2 counties to his father-in-law's farm in Shelby, with a surprise in tow, a brand new Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD. Crew cab. Midnight black. With every option on the sheet. The bow on the hood was red, like something out of a holiday commercial. The dealership sticker was still in the window, $71. Subay. I found out about it 4 days after the fact. When Paulette called me, she'd seen photos of it on Denise's social media. Marcus standing beside the truck with his arm around his father-in-law. Roy Calloway. Both of them grinning like they'd just won something. The caption read, "Roy deserves the world. So glad we could do this for him. Family first. Paulette. God bless her." Tried to soften it. Maybe they financed it together. Maybe it was from Denise's side. Paulette. I said, "Stop." She stopped. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of the pain, which had gotten worse since I'd halved my medication, but because I kept cycling through the arithmetic of it. The arithmetic was brutal and simple and refused to leave me alone. My son could not find $200 for his father's post-surgical medication, but he had found or arranged, or gifted, or whatever word you want to use, over $70,000 for a truck for his wife's father. I want to be careful here, because I spent a lot of nights in the weeks that followed trying to talk myself out of the obvious interpretation. Maybe Roy was in some kind of need I didn't know about. Maybe there was a reason it had to happen the way it did. Maybe Marcus felt guilty about me, and this was somehow a separate thing. A long-planned gesture. Something that had been in motion before my surgery. I gave those possibilities every fair shake I could. They did not hold up, because here is what I knew about Roy Calloway. He was 68 years old, retired from a regional insurance company with a full pension, owned 62 acres of land in Cleveland County, outright with no mortgage, and drove a perfectly functional 2019 Ram 1500 that he'd maintained meticulously. Roy was not struggling. Roy was, by any honest measure, more comfortable financially than I had ever been in my life. And Roy, it turned out, he was about to become the most important person in this story. Not because of what he received, but because of what he did with what he learned. I found out later, much later, after everything had unfolded, that Roy had seen Denise's social media posts about the truck, that he had also seen, around the same time, a separate post Denise had made, without thinking much about it, a photo of me sitting on my porch, squinting in the afternoon sun, with a caption that said something like, "Pop's recovering from his surgery, he's a tough old bird." And in the comments, Marcus had responded, "Dad's doing okay. Just taking it one day at a time." Roy had gone quiet at dinner that night. According to his wife, Sandra, he'd asked Denise a few careful questions. How was my recovery going? Was I comfortable? Did Marcus get out to visit me much? Denise had answered honestly, not sensing where it was going. She said I was managing, that Marcus had been busy, that I was independent and didn't like to ask for help. Roy had nodded and said nothing else about it that night. 2 days after that dinner, I was sitting in my recliner. This was on a Thursday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, when I heard a knock at my front door. I got up slowly, because getting up was still slow, and opened it to find Roy Calloway standing on my porch in a flannel shirt and work boots, holding a white sealed envelope in his hand. I'd only met Roy a handful of times. At Marcus and Denise's wedding 7 years ago, once at a Christmas gathering, once at a graduation party for one of their friends. We'd always gotten along fine, in the way that in-laws who rarely see each other get along fine politely, with no friction and no real depth. He was not the kind of man who showed up unannounced. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, using my last name in a way that felt formal and deliberate. "I hope I'm not bothering you." I told him he wasn't, and invited him in. He declined, which surprised me. He said he couldn't stay. He held out the envelope. "I need you to open this before Marcus gets here," he said. "Marcus is coming here. I called him this morning and told him Sandra and I wanted to take you both to dinner this weekend. I said I needed to drop off directions because I knew you didn't use a smartphone much." He paused. "He'll be here in about 40 minutes. I wanted to make sure you had time to read that first." I looked at the envelope. It was sealed with tape, not just the gummed edge. "Roy, what is this?" He looked me directly in the eye. His expression wasn't angry or dramatic. It was the expression of a man who had made a decision he knew was right and was at peace with it regardless of the cost. "It's something I should have known to do without needing to be told," he said. "I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what was happening." He shook my hand firmly, the kind of handshake that means something, and walked back to his truck. I stood in the doorway and watched him pull away. Then I closed the door, sat back down in my recliner, and opened the envelope. Inside was a card. On the front it said nothing, plain white stock. Inside, in Roy's careful block handwriting, it read, "Mr. Hargrove, I only recently learned what you've been going through since your surgery. I'm embarrassed that I didn't know sooner. I want you to use this without argument. It is given freely and without condition, and no one else needs to know about it. You raised a son who is generous in ways he has not yet learned to aim correctly. That is a fixable problem, and I intend to help fix it. With respect, Roy Calloway." Folded inside the card was a personal check made out to me for $3. Ling, ling, ling. I sat there with that check in my hand for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I have buried a wife, managed a mortgage alone. There worked through injuries that would have put younger men on disability. But something about sitting in that chair, in pain from pills I'd been cutting in half for 2 weeks, holding a check from a man I barely knew something. In that broke open, a part of me I'd been keeping shut. I wasn't crying about the money. I want to be very clear about that. I was crying because someone had seen what was happening. Someone had looked at the situation and decided that it was not acceptable. Someone had done the math that I had done alone in the dark and reached the same conclusion, and then actually done something about it. 41 minutes later, Marcus knocked on my door. He came in with the easy confidence of a man who believes everything is fine. He looked healthy. He'd gotten a haircut. He was wearing a new jacket. I noticed details like that now in a way I hadn't before. He hugged me, asked how I was feeling, made himself at home in the kitchen the way he always had, opening my refrigerator and helping himself to a can of soda. "So Roy invited us to dinner. That's kind of random," he said. "He came by a little while ago." I said, "What for?" I had been thinking about this moment for the 41 minutes since Roy left. I had considered several approaches. I could say nothing. Cash the check. Let things quietly realign. I could confront Marcus directly. Lay out the arithmetic. Demand an explanation. I could be cold. I could be wounded. I could be furious. What I actually did was hand Marcus the card. I watched his face as he read it. I watched the ease drain out of him slowly, like air leaving a tire. By the time he got to the part about generous in ways he has not yet learned to aim correctly, his jaw was tight and his ears had gone red. He folded the card. He didn't look at me right away. "Dad, I'm not going to yell." I said, "I'm too tired to yell. And I don't think yelling is what this needs." He was quiet. "I asked you for $200 for medication. I needed to heal from back surgery." I said, "You told me things were tight." 3 days later, "You bought your father-in-law a $70,000 truck." The silence in that kitchen was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was something Denise and I had been planning for a long time. He started, "Roy has done a lot for us. I know he has." I said, "I'm glad. He seems like a good man. He is a good man." As it turns out, Marcus stopped. "I'm not angry about the truck." I said, and I meant it. Roy can have 50 trucks. What I need you to understand, what I need you to sit with, is what that sequence of events means. What it says. You looked at your father, who needed $200 for post-surgical medication, and you decided that wasn't something you could do. And then you turned around and did something 70,000 times larger for someone else. I need you to understand that I can do the math on that. And I need you to understand that I did. Marcus put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. "I didn't think about it like that," he said. His voice was muffled and small. "I know you didn't. That's the part. That's the hardest to sit with." We talked for 2 hours. Real talking. The kind we hadn't done since he was a teenager. He told me things I hadn't known that he'd felt for years, like he could never quite reach me emotionally. That he'd poured his efforts into Denise's family because they were more expressive with praise and gratitude. That he'd convinced himself I didn't really need things the way other people did because I never asked. That I was always fine. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. And then I said, "Marcus, I raised you to be a man who handles his responsibilities. I taught you that by example. What I did not teach you, apparently, was how to see when your father needs help. That's on both of us. But from here forward, it's on you to fix." He nodded. His eyes were red. "The check," Roy wrote. I said, "I'm going to use part of it to pay for the medication I needed. The rest I'm going to put in an account and not touch." Not because I need it, but because I want Roy's faith in the possibility of this situation improving to have been correct. Marcus left that evening, quieter than he'd arrived. I stood in the doorway and watched his car disappear down the road. The same way I'd watched Roy's truck an hour and a half before. That was 14 months ago. I want to tell you things resolved cleanly and completely and quickly. But that would be a comfortable lie. And comfortable lies are how you end up old and alone, with a son who has learned nothing. What actually happened was slower and less cinematic and, I think, more real. Marcus came back 3 days later. He brought my prescription refilled at full dose. Receipt taped to the bag. He didn't make a speech about it. He handed it to me at the door and said, "This shouldn't have taken me this long." I told him it was okay. He told me it wasn't. And he was right. And I appreciated that he knew it. Over the following months, he started showing up differently. Not dramatically, no grand gestures. No gift-wrapped apologies. He started calling on Sundays. He started asking real questions instead of the surface-level ones that are really just ways of checking the conversation box. He drove out twice to take me to follow-up appointments, so I didn't have to ask Paulette. Roy and I had dinner with Marcus and Denise in November. Roy did not bring up the envelope, or the check, or any of it. He talked about his cattle operation and asked about my physical therapy progress, and told a long story about a car he'd bought and immediately regretted in 1987. He was easy and warm and entirely unbothered by any awkwardness, which made the awkwardness dissolve. At the end of the night, when Marcus and Denise had gone to pull the car around, Roy and I stood on the restaurant sidewalk in the November air, and he looked at me and said, quietly, "You doing all right? Better than I was." I said. He nodded once. "Good." And that was the end of it. I think about what Roy did a great deal. Not the money, though. The money helped. Practically and concretely. And I won't pretend otherwise. What I think about is the decision-making process that led him there. He could have stayed out of it. He could have told himself it wasn't his business. That family dynamics between a man and his son were too complicated for an in-law to wade into. He could have decided that the truck was a gift he and his daughter had chosen to give. And that was that. Instead, he looked at a situation and made a judgment about what was right. And then he did the right thing. Quietly. Directly. Without making it a performance. There's something in that I've been trying to learn from. Not just about money or family. About the habit of looking at situations clearly and acting on what you see instead of looking away because it's easier. I'm not sure Marcus and I will ever be the father and son I imagined us being when he was small and everything still seemed possible. But I think we are becoming something realer than that imagined version, something built from an honest reckoning with what we got wrong and a shared decision to do better. That's more than some people get. I'm 64 now. My back is healed. I take my full doses every morning without thinking much about it. I've got a decent recliner. A porch I like sitting on. A sister who calls too often and means well. And a son who calls on Sundays. Some mornings I think about Roy driving out here in his flannel shirt, holding that envelope, saying what needed to be said without making it ugly. Some mornings I think that's the most important thing one man has ever done for me. And it wasn't even about the money. It was about being seen. That's what I was running out of. Not medication. Not money. The sense that someone could look at what was happening to me and decide it mattered enough to do something about. Roy gave me that. I hope. Wherever you are in this story, whatever side of it you recognize yourself in someone, gives that to you too. And if you're in a position to give it to someone else, I hope you do what Roy did. Don't wait until you're asked. Go knock on the door.